Well, welcome officially to the webinar. I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa's Hybrid Workforce Services, and I'm joined today by Steve Ike, Senior Vice President with Cresa. Typically, we're joined by Paul Springer, who's a Senior Vice President at Cresa also, and our Human Resources and Operations expert. He's unable to make today's webinar, but he is, of course, available for questions if you come up with, if you have ideas that pop into your head specifically around human resources, or I should say especially around human resources. But welcome to the webinar. So there's a workforce trend happening right now that's both frightening, but also exciting. Frightening because it can cause real disruption for any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the economy, and exciting because of all the possibilities it offers for organizations who go on the offensive to capitalize on this trend. So I'm going to let the news headlines do the talking. This frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a recent Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth. Employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. From Fortune magazine. Job hopping heats up. 65% of U.S. workers are looking for a new job. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, with new opportunities and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. This is a chart from the U.S. Labor Department. This shows the number of U.S. workers leaving their job as a percentage of total number of jobs in the economy. And this ratio is called the quits rate. Now, quits are voluntary separations from jobs. It's a good barometer of worker confidence in their ability to get another job. A few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph is September 2009, just coming out of the Great Recession. Hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job, and the quits rate was a low 1.2%. Then the economy began to improve, and slowly the number of people leaving their jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April 2020. However, 1 year later, in April 2021, when we felt like we were coming out of the pandemic, the quits rate skyrocketed, a whopping 80% to 2.8%, the highest level since at least 2000. Now in May, it decreased down to 2.5%, still well above any time in the past 20 years, but then in June, it jumped back up again to 2.7% and stayed there for July. Then it jumped up again to 2.9%, breaking the old record set in April. This is the most recent information we have. In fact, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, which is what this is, the JOLTS, will come out again on Friday, November 12th. So we'll see what happens then. But this sort of exodus of or employees making these decisions to leave their jobs voluntarily is being called the Great Resignation. So what can be done about it? What are organizations doing to recruit and retain talent in the midst of this war for talent? Well, some are offering raises and bonuses. Some are extending perks, such as free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to design engaging office environments. Google is a good example. Google's building and repurposing their office spaces to make them more inviting, using ideas like cool outdoor hangouts, like they call them teepees for team meetings. They're really trying to make the office a place where you want to go and candidly are willing to make the commute. Finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they've learned about remote work over the past year and a half, and combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Now, a good example of this is Ford Motor Company. Ford has announced a really progressive hybrid work model for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours approved by their managers. Now, you got to understand, that's coming from a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. This isn't just for Silicon Valley and high tech. I think this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. She says, if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 12 months, it is that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need have shifted. So the question most organizations are therefore asking is, if a hybrid workforce strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest, then what should be the balance for my organization between remote and office? In other words, what is the right hybrid blend? And then once we've decided on the right blend, how do we put it into practice fairly, equitably, without opening ourselves up to any blind spots that we didn't see coming? Clearly, you need a plan. You need a plan to affirm and then operationalize your workforce strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department within an organization. Many business leaders feel like the person on this screen. There's so many different paths to choose from, so many different variables to consider, almost algorithms. If this, then that. Well, what about this, then that? So many organizations, therefore, they feel stuck and they're struggling to build consensus on a path forward. So if you're interested in answering questions like, well, what is the right blend for our organization? And what are the criteria for a successful hybrid workforce strategy? What is the roadmap to navigate to the right blend? And then finally, how do we operationalize our strategy, put it into action? And this is the webinar for you. As I mentioned, I'm Jason Jones. I'm joined today by Steve Ike. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now exclusively leading two of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services. Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy expertise to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, just to name a few. Today, we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar and send a copy out afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. At any time throughout the presentation, I want to emphasize that. At any time that you have a question in your mind, go ahead and pop it into the Q&A feature. Or even if you just have a comment, hey, I've seen this happen. That would be helpful because we all benefit from your observations and experiences, but also we want to hear your questions, and so do others. So today we're going to address, number one, context for where we are in the timeline of this COVID-19 experience from a work perspective. Two, the benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy. Three, its key elements. And four, a roadmap to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. So we start with context for timeline of the pandemic. Phase one was the immediate phase. Overnight, people were forced to work from home. Phase two is the endure phase. We continue to endure, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and working to maintain our culture. Phase three, however, that's the post-COVID phase. We call this the sustain and compete phase. Organizations will strive to sustain a new way of working that leverages what they learned about remote work while recapturing all of the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase two to phase three, we have to go through a transition. And that's where we are right now. But before leaders can go through that transition, they've got to ask a key question. And this is a question that addresses a powerful workforce desire for the freedom to choose where and when employees feel like they accomplish goals. And this key question is one that we suggest you too ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will, number one, be reflective of our culture and also minimize expenses and the threat to business continuity while maximizing productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results? You see, it's really important to keep in mind these key business drivers, particularly those ones under maximize, because this is what should inform your planning process for a hybrid strategy and its implementation. But in order to evaluate the different strategies, we start by understanding the benefits and the challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine, as I mentioned earlier, the best of remote working with the best of the shared office. Now, I want to pause for just a moment and make a quick point about bias. You see, bias can blind you to the opportunities presented by different points of view. It may seem elementary to review the benefits and challenges of remote versus office because most of these we really already know, we're experiencing them and living them every day. However, it's really important when you begin your planning process as part of your organization that you collectively agree as a team on what the benefits are of both options, regardless of where you personally feel is the right way to go. See, in order to foster objectivity and ensure that your organization remains open-minded, that's everyone remaining open-minded, start your planning process with a dialogue around the benefits and the challenges of both. And it's simple, it can go quickly. Here it is. At the top of the list, I should say, for the benefits of remote working is reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, and absenteeism. And of course, the personal costs to the employees of a reduced commute, spending on clothes and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state that their work-life balance is better, at least the majority do. Now, on the other hand, the benefits of the office are time proven and actually have really crystallized in many people's minds during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include the things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring or serendipitous moments. One benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. This is because, according to multiple surveys, at least 70% of employees want a hybrid experience. Therefore, organizations will have to offer some degree of flexibility between working at home and working in the office in order to recruit the best and the brightest that are part of that 70% that want both. Now, however, even with all the benefits of a hybrid workforce environment, there are several challenges that you have to plan for. And we're going to highlight 3 scenarios that organizations are likely going to be faced with in a post-COVID, fully hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A. Team A has a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She is on board with the concept of giving you freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your time, the output of your effort, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B has a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people he cannot see and requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained or restricted. So what's the outcome? Team B feels jealous and dispirited, and they wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Another challenge is internal division within a hybrid team. In this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time or majority in office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time remote or perhaps just majority remote. If the boss spends most of her time in the office, well, then in-office team members have proximity to her that remote members do not. And this proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information if the manager isn't careful about how she's managing. What's the potential upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced, and they may wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave this organization? And finally, another challenge of a hybrid workforce regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when an employee chooses to work. For example, profile number 1 are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number 2 are are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they take an afternoon or a day to work remotely, no big deal. And profile number 3's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person team meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office to work or just to socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles? What are the critical requirements, the organizational infrastructure to support them no matter where they're working and when they're working? Now, this next slide is really key to awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. The question is, what should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles at the same time? Should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any surprise why many organizations feel stuck in their planning? So those were three challenging scenarios, but here are some of the top challenges that result from those scenarios. And you'll see the list developing on the screen. These looming issues showcase the need for organizations to invest time right now, preparing for the future and building consensus. They should be working to cast a vision to employees and ultimately create a strategy that not only addresses these challenges, but also leverages all those benefits we talked about, the benefits of hybrid working, to maximize productivity, recruit and retain talent, and achieve the best financial results for the organization. So Cresa has developed conceptual frameworks and practical roadmaps to tie all of the components of hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy and then help operationalize the strategy. And the first key framework is a concept that we call be sequential to be successful. This gets you headed down the right path, and it all starts at the top. We believe the two most important elements of success for an organization are leadership and culture. They are the umbrella that overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting, retaining talent, and maximizing financial results inform all decisions and drives behavior. But to support these business goals, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, followed by workplace strategy and design, and then real estate strategy. Too often what happens is companies skip the human component of step 1, the workforce strategy, and they go straight to step 2 or step 3. We think that's a big mistake. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. Be sequential to be successful. And when workforce strategy is addressed like this first, it gives you the freedom to design your workplace with the confidence that you're basing that design and the follow-on real estate strategy on meaningful information. You want to build your workplace design and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. The process is best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is determine and affirm the strategy. Phase 2 is to operationalize the strategy. Now, step 1, determine and affirm, is easy to say, but much harder to do. Even those of you who have already determined what you feel like is your strategy at a high level, you may feel compelled to reassess key building blocks of that strategy in light of what you learned today. Now, at a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote, fully office, or a hybrid blend of the 2. But it's also at this step that you'll decide whether this is an organization-wide mandate or if it'll be left to the discretion of departmental leaders or team leaders below that. Who is making this decision ultimately? Now, once you've made that decision, you can move on to phase 2 to operationalize your strategy. But this first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk you through a roadmap for making this decision in a manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key departments of your organization. That's really important. And here's a good overview slide of how this all ties together. So these are the key departments: human resources, information technology, finance, etc. And each of them is going to make unique contributions to the collective success of the strategy. So in order to implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that each department is aligned with the others, they've been consulted, they've created consensus, and that's what will create an integrated approach and what I call the organizational infrastructure that supports the strategy. And part of your due diligence is to uncover, okay, well, what are the gaps that we have right now in each department? And then, of course, how can those gaps be filled? And by the way, this is what top talent is looking for. When they consider joining your organization or contemplate whether they should stay at your organization, they want to know, number 1, what is the strategy and its guidelines? And then number 2, they want assurance that the organizational infrastructure is in place to support them and their success no matter where they work. So this slide shows those critical requirements, this organizational infrastructure, I call it, of each department necessary to support the strategy. This is the checklist that every organization should work through when affirming their hybrid strategy. And at Cresa, we help our clients evaluate all of these requirements in a thoughtful, methodical manner. And we believe that's a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know of any other real estate firm that starts their real estate strategy by evaluating the critical requirements of an upstream workforce strategy. So we'll send an email with this list to all attendees today. No need to jot down every bullet point right now. And we're going to go through a few of them in some detail in the webinar. But if you would like to have a conversation with us about your specific situation, please contact us or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. Okay, so one of the most critical departments, of course, for a hybrid workforce strategy is human resources. And just a few of the critical requirements for HR to effectively support hybrid start with job roles. You have to determine which job roles are appropriate for hybrid work, and this gets overlooked a lot. Which job functions might be modified to facilitate virtual processes and virtual collaboration to make that hybrid status a little easier on the employees and the ones who are perhaps not hybrid. Next, you have to determine who has the personal aptitude for this type of work, for hybrid working. Not everyone who's in a job suitable for remote work is also a good fit for that type of work. Personal assessments can help, especially when coupled with training, and that leads to training for managers and employees. Managers are going to benefit from training to better manage a team that at any given time includes some people at home and some people at work at the same time, and they're switching perhaps every day, every week, every other day. We don't know. It's really important. For instance, What is your meeting protocol, your hybrid meeting protocol? How do you ensure that digital participants are seen and feel heard? So those who are not accustomed to this, managing diverse yet simultaneous communication streams really will benefit from some training around this. Now, the other piece, though, is training around the technology that enables hybrid work. Many employees really don't know how to fully use the technology that they've got. We've all been using Zoom and Teams, etc., but perhaps at a superficial level. There's much more power there to make this work, and it's going to be required to really be successful long-term in a hybrid environment. Next is eligibility requirements. They set expectations and they provide structure. Companies can use key performance indicators and performance evaluations to establish and maintain eligibility. And then lastly, a key component to your workforce strategy is an employee handbook. Many businesses, they only focus on updating the hybrid work policies and procedures section of the handbook. But with a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook really does require a detailed review to ensure that the policies align with both remote and in-office personnel. So you need to look at the whole picture. And speaking of hybrid workforce policies, these policies should address eligibility requirements, tools and resources that the company will provide for home use, then what the employee is expected to provide, and expectations for performance and participation. And finally, what constitutes disqualification. A clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they will likely be different from yours. So for a deeper dive now, moving into technology, I want to introduce my colleague, Steve Ike. Steve has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy and consulting to several large global organizations. Steve, I hand it over to you.
Jason, thank you so much. And as we begin to look at technology, I want to kind of set the stage that technology is really more than platforms and tools. It's a resource enabler that can be leveraged to create both a connected and a collaborative enterprise. And as we look at how, when, and where people work, whether it's remote, in the office, or a combination of these, communication and collaboration platforms are really the foundation to build that purposeful interaction that Jason spoke about earlier. Through real-time and near real-time communications, these platforms can be used to address anytime, anywhere, one number reach access across multiple devices. And we combine that with a shared workspace to really collaborate, meet, and share ideas. And it needs to focus both in real-time and near real-time communications events. And second, performance management focuses on managing productivity and outcomes versus activity and times. Excuse me, and aids in three areas that focus on the hybrid strategy. It's building trust, empowering employees, and really focusing on driving results, and helps manage that. If I can't see, I can't manage, and evolves to, if I can measure, I can manage. So performance management is both a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and evaluate the corporate performance and the employee performance. And this helps managers have meaningful conversations with the employees and provides real-time access to information in a visual dashboard. And in turn, this helps address the issues faced with the in-office and remote and the tension created to provide consistent and measurable information about productivity, progress towards goals, and driving those ultimate business outcomes. And third, with document management, we think of tools like Box and Dropbox and Google Drive. And when we combine these online storage tools and libraries with overlaying applications in SharePoint, it gives us a management tool that can be utilized to manage content, address the security, the owner of the document, the version of the document, the distribution of those documents and files. So it facilitates real-time and anytime access, process, and workflows so that document control can be managed across the enterprise. And let's think of three. One could be a loan process for a financial services organization, or claims management for an insurance provider. Could be financial and HR and marketing documentation or operations records that are used for general business. And a most recent example that we've got is we're working with a client that's going through a large acquisition over time. They've acquired, I think, over 20 companies in the last 3 years. And with each of these acquisitions, they've got document pack rats where the organization has large amounts of paper files. And they need to think about how do we convert these into digital images that it can access anywhere across the organization. So let's step into kind of the most often overlooked and analyzed area for remote work, and that's cybersecurity and compliance. With more people at home and more connected devices, this provides a chance for unauthorized access to critical and secure information. There are technical considerations like a separate wireless network within the home, secure connectivity from the home back to the office, and intrusion detection. Those are traditional ways. We also need to consider the human factors, human errors and threats from within, both intentional and accidental. As well, the physical network and logistics of your remote network need to be addressed. So when thinking of working at home, if I've got a dedicated area, can I provide a locked door or a secure laptop? And we need to have considerations when working in a shared environment for ears and eyes, and that we can manage who's got access to what information or what can be overheard. But a big area that folks don't take into account is both policy and training that focuses on employee responsibility. So we want to make sure that we have a documented IT security policy that addresses everything from bring your own device to training to phishing attacks, intrusion detection, wireless connectivity, and what is my web activity when I'm working on either a personal device connected to the corporate network or a corporate device that's connected to the network. So with all of these areas, technology is a tool, but we need to make sure that we're using it optimally to address remote work. So Jason, thank you for this, and I'm sure there'll be some questions at the end related to both technology and operations to step back in.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, there's so much there, and technology is just the, you know, I talk about organizational infrastructure. It really is the infrastructure that everything runs on from a practical perspective. Obviously, the people are the most important, but technology, we can't do remote without that. Now, however, we're talking about hybrid. So the next critical area of a organizational infrastructure to consider is the real estate, the physical space itself that supports the people. This is the space that people occupy. But the concept of office space has changed dramatically because of the pandemic. Now, to accommodate employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations really need to start viewing the workplace as not just one place, but a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places. Employees are going to want the option to choose a workplace location where they make the choice. They feel that they will be most productive that day to accomplish their goals, or even just part of the day, which means freedom of movement is important, whether between workplaces, but also even inside of a workplace. This spills over into that choice around that freedom to choose. Now, at the same time, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and the medium of collaboration. That medium means whether it's virtual or in person. And team leaders need to be intentional about when to use the medium of a digital tool, such as video conferences and collaboration software like Slack and Microsoft Teams, versus when to use the medium of the physical office for collaboration. They must be intentional about how they use these tools, ensuring that people who are working remotely on any given day are actively included in the in-person meetings and not at a disadvantage to people who are physically present in the office. This is where leaders are going to need to model the behavior that they want to see from their employees. And they need to make efforts to be organized, prepared, and intentional about how to make the best use of everyone's time, how to be equitable and inclusive, and how to build a culture of purposeful collaboration. So, to make it easy to visualize the steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, we developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of the process. And this is a core part of our hybrid workforce strategy consulting. And it starts with phase 1, which is step 1, affirm the strategy. This is to clearly state what your organization is. Fully remote, fully office, or some degree of a hybrid blend. It could be virtual first or virtual centric. There's a number of different names that are being used. And it's important to state whether this is an organization-wide mandate or to what degree the decision will be delegated to departmental and team leaders. We always begin with the vision and goals session, where you build a project team, establish your goals, and set a timeline for the project. Then you'll go through the process of discovery, conducting interviews and gathering information with focus sessions, perhaps, about the critical requirements of each company department, again, to align them together. Then you'll analyze by developing strategy, ensuring departmental alignment, and determine the appropriate solutions. This phase ends with an internal affirmation of your strategy. Phase 2 is the subject of the rest of the webinar. It encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the strategy that you've chosen. So let's talk about that step 2, which actually is going to be your timeline. A timeline gets the whole team on the same page regarding the prioritization of projects and the reality of how long it's going to take. We used to have step 2 as critical guidelines, but we changed that to something that we feel is so much more tangible and something that's so important that when you put it down on paper for everyone to see and to refer back to, you create the forward momentum that you're looking for, and you're able to sustain that forward momentum because you've got a clear timeline that spells out milestones, cost estimates, and even guidelines for managers for policy implementation. When you put out those guidelines for the managers, it ensures that the organization, or they know that the organization stands behind them as long as they follow the guidelines. And to further help your managers, we also recommend that you consider categorizing each employee, whether on-site, remote, flexible, etc., which will help them communicate the plan with transparency and equity. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. And this not only means putting the plan in writing, which is sort of like the timeline, that's a big part of putting it in writing, but also documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions and contracts, and of course, creating the dynamic schedules that will detail where and when employees are working, if that is determined that will be assigned versus employee choice or manager choice that's changing from day to day. A lot of times it's helpful to go ahead and have some of those in-office days set in stone, so to speak, so that everybody knows when somebody's going to be in the office if they want to see them in person. Now, after clear documentation, you'll need to prepare a very clear communication and change management plan. It's critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on culture and operations. Preparing a 12-month communication playbook will put you in position to manage the change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles you're going to use for communicating this, this new strategy, and that would be using perhaps Slack or newsletters, town halls, etc., and a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging. And that's going to help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months. Finally, with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. You should review your strategy every 3 months after the initial rollout in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas, solicit feedback along the way, and then take the initiative to make changes. Make sure that you're achieving those fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting, retaining talent, and achieving the best financial results. And if you're not, make a change, course correct. So, do you remember at the beginning of the webinar when we talked about the inherent bias everyone brings for either working remotely or working in the office based on just what they prefer? Well, that bias can really sway the outcome of your planning, particularly if you have a really strong leader or a really strong voice that's pushing what they feel is best. So, Cresa helps. We help our clients bridge that gap between differing opinions of the organization to ensure that a potentially subjective process can remain an objective process about what's best for the organization as a whole. Cresa offers our clients 3 tiers of support in navigating their roadmap. Tier 1 is focused on operationalizing a strategy that's already been decided for the most part. We review previous discovery activities and then use that information to align all the departments and operationalize the strategy. Tier 2 spends more time helping our client with the discovery process in collaboration with key leaders of the organization. We conduct stakeholder interviews, focus sessions, and we'll do surveys as appropriate, and then help operationalize the strategy that they collectively decide on. Tier 3, similar to Tier 2, but it takes an even deeper dive across more of the organization during the discovery process. And of course, we often modify these tier levels collaboratively with our clients. Sample deliverables from these engagements include an executive summary, timeline with milestones and costs. As I mentioned, I feel that that's critical. Updated hybrid workforce policies, sample work agreements, 12-month communication plan, sample job descriptions, and a decision matrix to help teams finalize their strategy. So, with all of that, let me offer a summary of the webinar and this process. And the first thing, the first of 3 summary items is the desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. And recognize that this desire, and you have an opportunity to leverage an innate human emotion for the benefit of the organization and its mission as a whole. As important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires most organizations to develop a hybrid workforce strategy, unique to them, their culture, and their business needs. And to get there, transition is key. How you transition to your new hybrid work environment will determine how competitive you will be to attract and retain talent, to compete with other organizations in the marketplace. And finally, to make that transition successful, be sequential. Be sequential to be successful. This is really important. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize a strategy, be sure that upstream, your organizational infrastructure, all of the departments and how they contribute to the success and well-being of your employees, who are the ones accomplishing the mission, make sure that you have evaluated that and that they have everything in place to support that strategy that you choose. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all these departments to ensure preparedness. And then follow through on your steps for implementation. That way you're going to be in a better position to evaluate ongoing feedback and make continuous improvements. Now, there's one last thought that we want to leave you with, and we've got 10 minutes left, so we got a little bit of time for Q&A. But it's simply this. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off of aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. And similarly, implementing corporate programs, private sector programs that involve significant change, they require the same 3 elements. Because the Navy and corporations and nonprofit organizations are made up of people accomplishing goals together. But planning and training, they don't happen without leadership. This is a time that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. So, thank you for joining us on the webinar today. As I mentioned, we now have 9 minutes for some Q&A. Here's our contact information on the screen. You can reach out to us or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. I'm going to stop share and bring Steve back up. I'm going to check the Q&A. Stand by one moment as I bring that up. And we have time for a few questions. So first question, it looks like, is for Steve, which is, here we go. What are some best practices to, quote, measure and modify hybrid policies to ensure that we're staying successful? I think what they're speaking of is once you've got something in place, okay, how do we measure it? How do we, then obviously you would modify as appropriate, but okay, what are some best practices?
I think that's great. And it'll really combine both a process improvement practice and a change management practice. So with that, bringing groups together as you mentioned earlier, the 30, 60, 90-day check-in, the 6-month check-ins, involve your line of business leaders, your team leaders, and your employees, and continually gather feedback. And one of the things that we've done with a lot of folks is actually setting up these monthly and quarterly meetings, whether it be in a huddle or a workshop, where we can solicit feedback, what's working well, what's not working well, ideas for improvement, and then measure that against. Be creative and be curious as you're going through. But then for the change management, it gets back to where you mentioned earlier, communications. That's bidirectional, gathering feedback from everyone on how it's working. Assessing progress and measuring that. Also fitting into this is training for managers and employees on how to handle these changes, because what you want to be able to do is have common process and common tools and common leadership styles for managing the teams, but allowing the flexibility. So with that, it's looking at measuring and modifying to be successful.
Yeah. So it sounds like those consistent communication between leaders and employees is critical for making sure that you're on the right track, right? Exactly. And that everyone's aligned.
Right. Yeah. And it's not a set and forget. You want to be able to have good listening sessions, so the managers and the employees are speaking on a regular basis to see how they're doing, and then coaching on ideas for improvement.
Yeah. Any tips on the frequency for those types of conversations, either formal and informal?
I would say the huddles. We saw it early on, starting with daily huddles between managers and employees, and that was probably because there was so much unease with.
At the beginning of the pandemic, you mean?
Yeah, beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So at least once or twice a week, managers and employees get together, and then at least once a month for cross-functional managers coming together in a huddle, and then quarterly workshops to say, hey, based on what we've seen, what can we do to improve? What are the ideas? Throw it up on a whiteboard and measure where that'll have an impact.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah, so here's another question that has come in. How do we avoid an us versus them culture developing between employees that work in different locations? And I've heard that come up multiple times before. There's I think, a valid concern that people who choose to be in the office versus people who choose, or mostly in the office versus people who choose most to be remote, there could end up with a, hey, we're in the office, we're working harder, which is, we see how hard people have been working at home, so that's not true. People at home thinking, well, that person's just going into the office so they can have proximity to the manager and get ahead. So how do you avoid that scenario from happening?
I have seen that and experienced that tension that goes on, and I think part of that is addressed in two ways. Making sure that when you are meeting, that you're discussing relevant activities and productivity and everybody's contribution towards the productivity of the group and of the organization. So getting back into, and we'll talk probably a little bit about performance management so that everybody can see how am I contributing to the role and how are we doing collectively for that.
Yeah.
But the second is, and it seems tangential, but it fits right into that tension, is setting up peer groups and peer mentoring so that you've got folks that are working from home collaborating with folks that may be in the office more often, so that they're working together and they've got
That's an interesting tip. Peer mentoring, pairing different work styles
yes,
together. And by styles, I mean remote versus office in a very, very general sense.
right, and tenured versus new employees as well, so that they can see how I fit into the organization. And mentoring also outside of your direct leadership chain. Everybody's looking for how can I develop and reach my full potential within the organization.
Yeah. Right.
And having a leadership mentor, a leadership sponsor that's outside of your group allows folks to feel connected, whether they're working in the office or working remotely.
Yeah.
So it's almost organizational efficiency and organizational performance, that I'm part of something, and it ties back into those areas. So it's complex, but really it comes back to some of the basics. Is having somebody that's involved and working with me in my everyday roles and responsibilities, both from peer standpoints and managerial standpoints.
Yeah. Well, my answer to this is leadership. It comes back to leadership. It must, there must be a culture around whatever the strategy is that is accepting of the strategy and not accepting of people who are not on board with the strategy. Right. And that starts at the top. So I really feel strongly about the way a leader communicates what the plan is for her or his organization as perhaps the CEO, or his or her department or team. That's got to be communicated down as this is the way it's going to be. So everybody's clear, right, and there's no undercurrents of suspicion or doubt, etc.
Right. And you think about it, if I feel like I'm participating and involved in the outcomes of the organization, and my input to that success is observed and recognized,
yeah,
I then say that I'm part of helping the organization reach a higher goal, and being involved in that. That way, the folks who are working in the office see what they're contributing, and they see what everybody else is contributing. So it's all part of, we're all in this together, pulling in the same direction or rowing in the same direction.
Right. Well, actually, that's a great segue into the next question that is here, which is we're working on socializing our hybrid plan. So communicating, employees are laser focused on what this does to me, as understandably. What advice do you have to shift focus on what it means for their team, for their work, for collaboration? Basically, this is saying, how do we get employees looking at the bigger picture, not just them for whatever this policy is going to be?
Okay. And with both the policy and the plan, I'm going to circle back to performance management. And when we look at socializing the hybrid plan, you've got a communication.
We did just at 3 p.m., so we might have to be brief about this answer.
So brevity is there. So we have all of this data coming in from our HR systems, from our CRM systems and ERP systems, our financial systems. What if we could capture relevant data to my job, my role, and my team's role, and present that visually into a dashboard, and combining HR management with performance management to see part of the bigger thing.
So what a performance management system would do is it provides the employee with a bigger picture, where they fit in that bigger picture, so to tie their personal efforts to larger group efforts to say, okay, this may not be perfect, whatever this hybrid strategy is that my company picked, but I can see how it fits in the bigger picture to accomplish larger goals.
Right.
And again, that goes back to leadership.
Exactly. You're presenting data by role, by department, and by person, with both subjective data and objective.
That's very good. Yeah, the performance management is key to this hybrid environment. Okay, well, thank you, Steve. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Again, I'm Jason Jones, Steve Ike, and we welcome the opportunity to have these conversations. We have so many conversations with organizations all the time. It's a very interesting topic and critical for the future success of organizations. So please reach out to us or the Cresa advisor who invited you here, and look to see an email from us with a recording of the presentation as well as some slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, have a great day.